Thanks for joining us, everyone, for this CPMC Catholic Prison Ministries Town Hall. My plan was to present this with Dr. Harry Dudley. Harry's been working with us very closely, and he might be able to join us a little later in this hour. This morning in conversation with Harry, he's had a couple of medical areas that he needs to attend to, and therefore ended up having a physician's appointment set for this time. So, but hopefully Harry will be able to join us as we move through this time together. As noted on the screen here, and as we had publicized, our hope was to give you just a little background on kind of our partners of pastoral care work with Catholic Prison Ministries very specifically, to share with you a little bit the framework that we've been developing for the formation and certification for volunteers and paraprofessionals and chaplains, those ministering really by those affected by incarceration and detention, and give you an update on the current progress around resources, as well as share a pilot project really that we just finished in June, and that we hope to be able to, in a sense, replicate or duplicate perhaps in some of your dioceses as well. So, but I want this time that we have now, I'll try to move through the material in a way that's hopefully expeditious and gives us time for some exchange together. First of all, my name is David Lichter. For those that are not familiar with me, I'm Executive Director of the National Association of Catholic Chaplains. We've been around since 1965. I've been around but not involved in this since 1965. And you'll see in the top the logo of the Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition that really has initiated back in 2018, and Partners of Pastoral Care that we began back in 2016, 2017. So have all of three of those represented as this has been really a developing partnership with all of us. I'm very mindful, though, as we gather today on August 6th, that this in the church is the Feast of the Transfiguration. Kind of the premonition of that event, of that in the midst of divinity, that Christ's in intense suffering, that divinity was present, God's present in intense suffering. We're mindful this is the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima, 140,000 people. And Nagasaki, 70,000. The terrible devastation to those countries and to those populations. But we're also very mindful about all that is occurring over these past months, in particular around incarceration, and 37% of population is people of color, 67 are in prison, and just the mass incarceration and the issues around racial disparities, from policies to implicit racist bias. We're mindful of this is the setting within which we work and minister. We're very grateful to all of you who are participating, because as I look through the list, I couldn't imagine the years and years and years of accumulated experience that all of you have in working with those in our prison systems. And we're grateful that you are part of this brief time with us together, but more grateful for your ministries. I'm also very mindful of the many partners who've been over the last 2 or 3 years involved in the prison ministry work, as well as our partners in pastoral care, and whether it's Vincent de Paul or Malta or Dismas Ministries or Catholic Charities and the many others. And also very grateful as I kind of look through the list of the many dioceses who are represented in this call. Many of you have longstanding programs of training and formation for those working in prison settings. Some of you have commented that you have many volunteers, but not necessarily a formation program for them. Others of you have mentioned, gee, we're looking to create programs. So I'm hoping some of the things we share today might be helpful to you, as well as links to resources, whether they're with Catholic Prison Ministries or with the NACC particularly. And I'm also very grateful for the Catholic Prison Ministries Formation Committee. We've been meeting for now almost a year and a half as we try to look to develop resources that hopefully will be helpful to you, as well as grateful to the USCCB Subcommittee on Certification for Ecclesial Ministry and Service that have been very supportive in this process over the past 3 years, engaged very actively as a partner in this work. So grateful to all of them and all of you being a part of this call together. I would like us just to begin with prayer. God of wholeness, of space, time, and light, your presence peers in all and over all events and experiences of life. We come to pray for the most vulnerable among us, the broken in mind, body, and spirit. For them you have come to be most near. They are among your chosen ones to manifest your healing and saving powers of mercy, patience, and faithful endurance. And on the cross, through this, our humanity you took on in love, for love. Touch and make holy their sufferings. Breathe in them your spirit. Immerse and wash all cells with your precious blood and water. Hide and make as your own their wounds. Hear them when they cry out, Jesus, remember me. They bend like bruised reeds, not broken. Like the good thief Dismas, not spurned. For in all who is like you, O God of compassion, your will be done. A new morning is birthed. Amen. So let me just kind of rapidly just give you a quick background on where we are from over the past 2 or 3 years. It was so now almost 3.5, 4 years ago when RASCOB provided some funding for some collaborative planning around pastoral care. So the NACC had received this grant, and we had brought a group of about a couple dozen people together, and I'll show some of those who kind of gathered for what purpose to look at pastoral care. As you know, 30, 40 years ago, a lot of attention was given to religious formation, Catholic education, and how to provide some national guidance and standards and direction and supports to people doing the work. And in many ways, that was never done for a pastoral care. And so when we gathered in fall of 2016, it was kind of a new thing. We really realized that there had never been a gathering of people doing pastoral care or involved with pastoral care to look at nationally the settings. And we realized that in many ways there were no national competencies, no national networking among people doing the work. Dioceses had very different capabilities and resources, and really was an express value for some type of national resources and programmings. And we know we wanted to be able to utilize programs that already existed and were really fine to use good leading practices. So our initial aim was to say, well, what are the critical needs, and what are the types of ministries that were needed there? Could we develop competencies? Because what do people need? Who do they need to be to work in the settings? And then try to build some core elements for those doing volunteer, as well as professional care ministry formation, and then try to organizationally look and say, how do we do this together? So there are a lot of people that came to the table. At the time, the correctional chaplains, AACCA, the deacon directors, the USCCB, the National Catholic Council of Hispanic Ministry, the Veterans Affairs, Catholic Health, National Association of Lay Ministries, those involved in the Alliance for Certification, the graduate programs, as well as Catholic Charities itself. So many different organizations gathered. Then we had representatives from different dioceses who have programs already, from the Institute of Gerontology, the detention ministry from Miami, Catholic Chaplain Corps, community nurses, diaconate formation, the Institute of Lichter Pastoral from the St. Mary's of the Lake. So as you can see, a lot of different individuals as well as organizations were represented. And we've also had good ongoing consultation with representatives from several archdioceses and dioceses as we've tried to, again, have a broader consultation around the work being done and how to go about it. But an emphasis was on trying to think of the specific settings, criminal justice settings, care for families of those incarcerated, as well as migrants, elder care, home care settings, faith community nursing. And so we tried to look at various places where pastoral care was needed and what was needed to be able to provide that care effectively. We did end up developing competencies, and if you haven't been to the NACC website, I will just give you a quick link to an example. But what we took was the national USCCB national certification standards, but certainly again based out of coworkers, but then tried to look specifically what were those needed for pastoral care. So took the general and say what would be more specifically related to pastoral care. And so we did end up developing, in a sense, four types of competencies: one for criminal justice corrections, one for diocesan parish settings, one for senior elder care, one for primary diaconate. And if my link works here, I will just pull up briefly one here that kind of shows the example of for criminal justice. So we had kind of the human. So these would be, the far left are the ones that the USCCB offered for general catechetical. And then we tried to look for more pastoral care competencies specific to the field, criminal justice, etc. And so this is an example that I wanted to show you that is an example of what we have developed, again, as work in progress, initial development of these in the process. And we shared these competencies with the subcommittee of certification of ecclesial ministry and service, and they were very encouraging to have us continue to develop this as resources for dioceses, etc. And so we have these developed. We see them as a work in progress, hope to be refined over time, and therefore we hope that you could look and access them as well. One of the things, though, we've tried to develop programs based on those competencies, and that's what we want to be able to share further with you. Again, they are developed in a way that takes this holistic formational approach: human, spiritual, intellectual, pastoral. Very familiar, I think, for those who've been familiar with coworkers now for the past, since 2005. And anybody who's been involved in diaconate formation or priesthood formation, certainly these have been the, in a sense, the four pillars. But what we've tried to do is think about preparing people in a developmental way, knowing that many are in volunteer work and will never be involved more part-time or full-time in this work. And so our pilot project we're going to share is more kind of foundational. Kind of what would be a program for those in volunteer capacity, and what would be key components of that. We are developing what would be the specialization, which is more focused, and then leadership. And let me just touch on this briefly. So we think about the foundational are those who are just getting involved or will stay very involved in a foundational way. But specialized are ones who've been more specifically involved, maybe in an extended time, in whether it's prison care, senior care, home care. And the leadership are those who are overseeing, in a sense, that area of pastoral care and really are kind of charged with helping to prepare others for the work itself, or really have chosen now for this to be their full-time effort. We tried to think about the scope of practice for each, that foundationally, one would be getting very basic pastoral care ministry skills, from empathic listening to pastoral care presence, and how to best assess the setting to know who one is working with and what one needs to be in those settings. And so the preparation focus is very grounded in all four of these dimensions, but enough for them to say, gee, do I want to stay working in this field? But I have enough to be introduced to the work itself. Whereas the specialization is more intended to have someone gain ever more deeply the meaning of the ministry, as well as to understand more those being served and how best to be prepared to provide care in the settings where one is working. Now, in this case, it would be the correctional settings. And so the prep is more deeply involved with one's own spirituality, as well as getting the specialized knowledge and skills in that area. In this case, we're talking more about kind of the prison jail settings itself. And then we kind of look to the leadership, where one is going to be involved more in leading people in this service. A more comprehensive preparation. Maybe this person is going to be more involved in training the trainer, a group leader, perhaps overseeing specific areas of spiritual care. And therefore, we want that preparation to be there in a way that not only is one's own spirituality is deepened, but you have more of the skills, knowledge, and ability there to help and prepare and organize others. So that's how we kind of thought about. And again, Jean Marie Weber is also on this session, and I see Jean Marie. Also has helped to develop these materials in the process. But we kind of worked with 6 key questions in framing the formation and preparation. One is very basic. Why am I doing this? What motivates me to get involved in the prison jail ministry? Why am I doing this? For my own purpose, or really rooted more deeply in kind of the gospel charge that's a part of this, so to speak. And then moving to where am I and who's there? And so it's more specifically, whether it's the jail and prison ministry or hospital, who am I meeting with? And what is that setting like? And what do I need to be attentive to? The third is more, how am I there as out of my framework of being a person of the church? How do I represent the pastoral care of the ministry of the church? And then core 4 and 5 are really more, what am I doing there? And 4 is more around accompaniment, listening presence, just, right, how am I there in a way that I'm not a preacher, and I'm not there to proselytize, but I'm there to be with the person in the way that I need to be. And then the 5th is more, what am I doing there? More as in a sense, a religious agent. Am I there to be doing a Bible study? Am I there to do prayer group? Am I there to assist with the Eucharist? And to have more specific training and understanding of what it is specifically doing. And the 6th is so important, is how do I navigate? So I'm very much aware of going in, and so many of you have trained people to go into their settings to make sure that they've gone through all of the screening, all of the things that they need to be attentive to in order to be allowed even into the setting, whether it's a jail or prison. So that's kind of the framework that we wanted to use. And we did develop, though, a framework, sets of competencies that are both available in English and Spanish. Developed kind of a model for this pastoral care formation that explains, in a sense, the pathways and suggested content and methodology. And we have examples, appendices that show kind of the link to that. And let me just take a moment to do this live link to show you what that looks like and where it is. I know you all have received a copy of this PowerPoint as well. So on the page of the NACC under Partners of Pastoral Care, you will see here the competencies, English, Spanish, and then you'll see the Pastoral Care Project booklet that is there again in English and Spanish that touches on framing the mission introduction purposes of the program, what would be suggested curriculum, pathways for formation, as well as appendices that give you sample of types of programs. And you'll see when you look at appendices 4 and appendices 5, there's sample sessions for Catholic prison ministries, sample sessions for foundations for Catholic prison ministry as examples. So you will see that in a sense on that page itself. So I just wanted to alert you to that, and I'm going to go back now to the PowerPoint. I just want to alert you to those resources that are there. Now, in the case of the Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition, as you know, this really in April of 2018, there was a gathering in Washington, D.C. of many different organizations, 30 plus, to look at Catholic prison ministries in a holistic way. And some of those I mentioned earlier were part of that partnership. Again, the role was to kind of look at the wider reality of prison ministry. Today, we're mostly volunteers, some hired, and looking at reentry and advocacy and other dimensions. And part of the role was to collaborate and develop and use the work that we're talking about, the Partners of Pastoral Care Resources. And initially to develop a pilot project. We're going to talk about that then, kind of a foundational level, building on really Prison Ministry 101 that was recorded in May of 2019. So we're about a year out from that previous recording, and I'll mention more about it. But it's part of the role, and as you know, the mission really is to promote Catholic ministry to all those affected by incarceration, to recruit, retain, and support and empower those who are doing this ministry. with ultimately desire to create that more just, merciful criminal justice system closely aligned with the ministry and teaching of the church and the example of Pope Francis. So in this process, we're trying to create opportunities to share resources and best practices on restorative justice, but also making sure we can provide those supports who are doing the work itself. And so Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition has been a partner with us and the Partners of Pastoral Care Project. The Catholic Prison Ministry, we have a formation committee that I mentioned very early. Part of our effort is to try to create training materials and a certification process within NACC itself. But we really, again, a plea to you who are on the call, trying to look at good programs that are already out there and how best to help duplicate and help supplement them in the midst of this work that we're doing itself. We did do a pilot project, and that's what I'd like to just spend a minute with. That I really am grateful to the Archdiocese of Santa Fe and the Archdiocese of New Orleans. We were able to pull together with the help of Deacon Robert Vigel from the Archdiocese of New Orleans and from the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, and John Messenheimer from the Archdiocese of New Orleans, those who have been doing the work or entering into the work itself. And they were very willing to enter into a pilot project that started in March, just as we went into COVID, and went to June. And that I'll explain a little bit of the pilot project, but I want to acknowledge specifically a great gratitude to the two archdioceses that were willing to kind of undergo this together. The pilot foundational components were, we envisioned foundational to be about 30 hours in total, where one would be going through doing one's own personal reading and learning, as well as coming together for 6 one-hour sessions like this in Zoom together to kind of walk through what am I learning and how are we exchanging what we're learning together. So there's a kind of a communal experience of formation together. And so, but we also anticipate that someone is doing at least 6 hours of on-site. And certainly in the time of COVID, a lot of that was more writing letters and phone calls and other things that were possible. We realize in this COVID time, it's just been very difficult in a sense to be in on any site. And yet the value of the foundational program is hoping that there can be on-site engagement so that there can be bringing to the sessions itself. So many involved in this foundational program where people already having had experience. We had a combination of new people who are just getting into it, as well as those who have been involved. Part of the purpose of the pilot is to get feedback from them and saying, is this helpful? Was the material helpful? Was getting together in a formative context like this helpful to them? We'll give you some feedback on how that went. And if you've got the PowerPoint, you already have read some of the comments. But the intent of having orientation, having these sessions guided, reflection booklet. We actually took the Jail and Prison Ministry 101. Harry Dudley was able to kind of download and do a transcription. Father George Williams, who was one of the presenters, and Father Dustin Fedden, the other, they helped to do some editing of it. And so now that is actually available in a kind of booklet form with guided questions. And so that's another resource, along with on the Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition website, you see a lot of webinars that are there free for one's use. And so a combination of viewing Jail and Prison Ministry 101, reflection booklet, and other webinars to help guide, along with guided questions, are part of that formative process itself. And so there were links to the resources, and then we had these virtual sessions, as I mentioned. And then we ended actually with a session that was more of a commissioning. It was a prayer service. People had a chance to process on what it's been for them, what they've learned. And because it was of two dioceses, the Archdiocese of Santa Fe and the Archdiocese of New Orleans, there was a wonderful exchange, and people deeply appreciate the fact that one beyond one's own diocese has been involved in this program and process together. So this is small, but hopefully you see it also on the web, on the PowerPoint that you were sent, but I want to at least give you a sense of what was a part of each session. So we called them modules. And as you recall, the first question was, why am I doing this? And so that was kind of the focus of the first session. What attracts you to this? What motivates you? How are you aware of your own personal biases, hurts, and being wrong to affect your ministry? How is your Christian faith motivating this? And so we mentioned several topics we covered, but then the materials that people received ahead of time were Ministry in the Incarcerated at the Time of Era of Pope Francis, which is a webinar that's actually on the Catholic Prison Ministry site. It was the Jail and Prison Ministry 101 session, as well as a reflection booklet. So here's the material to review ahead of time, here's what to read, here's some reflection, and then come to the session and kind of moving through both ahead of time reflection as well as in the session itself, kind of walking through these questions. What goes into your initial discernment for this ministry? What is your key motivation? Scriptural passages. Explain how important your relationship with Jesus and the church has to do with grounded in this ministry. Discuss with a mentor sponsor, someone who you're with, your own journey story. What did you learn from the importance of prayer and sacrament? What do you found most helpful in the first session? Recommendations. So these are a variety of questions that help shape the hour together, to reflect together. And again, the disclosiveness of those involved was, quite wonderful. And people appreciate it again. As one person had spoken about it, she said, I've been in ministry for a long time in this, but to actually have a chance to be with others, just to reflect on motivation and growth was so nurturing. The other part of it was just feeling I'm a part of a community of people doing this together. And so there was something sacred about that first hour together. But the content was very much aligned to, as I mentioned, the pastoral care competencies. And so again, Harry, Dudley, and Jean Marie have worked closely to say, if we're offering content, how does it relate to the competencies that are recommended for this? And so this is an example of, again, part of the session where people could say, if I'm doing this work, do I have an appreciation and affirm the dignity of the human person, especially around the diversity of cultures, race, economic groups? Do I recognize my own gifts and limitations, and how to be self-reflective and collaborate with others, get peer feedback, etc.? How do I give witness to integrated spirituality formed by Scripture, which is a very broad and a rich competency, and it's not certainly met by any of us. I'm not there, but at least frames a bit what we look at and how we approach it. And so Module 1 had here's our focus, here's the resources, here's questions, and here's how it relates to competencies. So we had 6 of these modules. And again, we'd be able to make available to you this type of material to help look at it. And so we worked through the 6 modules with the group itself. Here's some comments that people had made after the sessions. It said, it just gave me the feeling I'm not alone, that there are resources to tap into that I didn't know about. There are others who have the same longing to be able to enter into it more deeply. So I can do this job with the Holy Spirit and with all of you. That all the mistakes I make are things I can learn from, especially I have all these materials that were sent. I can keep going back to them and saying, oh yes, that's a great idea. Or it was actually a real big gift because I feel that doing this training actually gave me a sense of community in the ministry and some background before I had to deal with the logistics of the prison ministry. It helped me get to the heart of what it's about. So that was by one who was just planning to enter right before COVID, and everything was put on hold. And so it was really going through this initial sessions without necessarily having the experience of being able to enter into it, except the gained experience from those who were involved in this, but have had the experience of learning and were able to share their own experience of what it's like to be working in the settings they were. Another mentions the spiritual groundings and the competencies. It led to discussion and forced us to focus on God as the facilitator in our work and serving others and bringing us together as a community as we serve together the people we have a privilege to serve. And it's been a community building experience, one which brought practicality to our services and spiritual grounding. I appreciate everyone. And the final participant comment before we kind of open up is that the pilot project was incredibly helpful across all levels of experience. This is by someone who's had 30 years of legal work in advocating for those incarcerated. From first-time volunteers in the correction settings to seasoned volunteers with decades of experience, because it provided a platform for all of those experiences to come together to share the unique perspectives about best practices, about our core values in doing this work, about common challenges and pitfalls that we may encounter, and how to manage them wisely and pastorally, and why it matters that we always view this work as a team effort and not as lone wolf, and how to make sure that we keep God at the forefront of everything we do while balancing the realities of man-made structures with all of our flaws and human brokenness, all of us. So there's some participant comments, and I've kind of moved through what are the components, but I did want to make sure you had a little bit of a overview of what this pilot project has done. A pilot project validated for me why it's so important that we share certain core competencies, and why it's so important that we each strive for improvement in ourselves, no matter our prior experience. So right now we did the pilot project, and now we're trying to think through how we can kind of make this available. In the Archdiocese of New Orleans and Archdiocese of Santa Fe, it's now saying you have gone through it. Which of you would be willing to kind of lead a group in your archdiocese, to take what you've gone through and now to share it, which in a sense is training the trainer. It'd be an initial formative process that others now could perhaps use and duplicate because the resources are there. And then in turn, thinking about kind of the mentoring portion of that. But we view this as ongoing development. It's in some ways we're in the middle of still R&D, resource and development. We appreciated the feedback from the Archdiocese of Santa Fe and the Archdiocese of New Orleans participants, and they gave us some good feedback on material and helping us to refine it in the process. But this could potentially be complementary to the things that you are doing, or perhaps it could really fill a space for yourselves. So certification. So we are developing, in a sense, what are the expectations? And so we have these competencies that I already linked to show you. We're developing the content and curriculum for the foundational and then specialization and then the other. And then we're trying to look at what are the required hours for each of these. So for the foundational level, we said, 30 hours, 24 that includes one's own learning and some type of formative process, as well as 6 that are more in-depth, experiential in whatever setting. And each of the other 2, specialization and the other, will have, in a sense, more in a sense content as well as more hours involved in the field itself. And then we're trying to look and say, all right, how do we ensure that as one's going through this, there's an assimilation and development, so that one can say one has kind of moved through this in a way that one personally feels comfortable to do the work, as well as whoever's overseeing them feels there's been a process in place that one feels very comfortable, in a sense, letting this person work in the setting. So that's kind of the process. The plan is for us to be able, by 2021, to be able to submit to the USCCB subcommittee on certification, kind of these 3 levels. So, but we're looking at the next 6 months as more developmental and be able to flesh out the specialization as well as the leadership levels here for the area of prison ministry itself. So that's kind of the components as we look at it. We have already, again, with the Archdiocese of Santa Fe and the Archdiocese of New Orleans, appreciate their partnership, and we're looking at how to develop partnerships with many of your dioceses as well. As this call, many of you've come on the Zoom. Before we started, several of you were connecting already, and one of the things we're trying to make available is, in a sense, the networking among you around programs that exist. We have Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition. We have a website where you can sign up and make sure that you're on that website. But we also want to find a way to make sure we can have these types of sessions with you if you're doing this program or developing it, where you can learn from each other and share the resources you have, as well as continue to develop the national resources as we've begun to do. And have these model preparation programs for the pathways. And you might have a program in place already, and hopefully, if that's great, perhaps some of the pieces of what we have could enhance your program. Perhaps things that you have in place could help us strengthen our program. And we want to have that type of an exchange with you to learn how we can improve what's out there, as well as to have a place where your program could be parked for others to view and to appreciate. We also look to have, in a sense, as we're already doing with the webinars on CPMC, more specific topics and webinars on things that are specialized to the area of prison ministry itself. And again, creating the national credentialing program. In the case of the Archdiocese of New Orleans, the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, we did have a final session and certificate for completion of that program, but we want to be able to have in place that national credentialing for the dioceses that they too can embrace and use. Ultimately, the dream is to have the full online training where one can plug into something nationally to utilize. Again, we'll be looking to look for funding for that, but we're not there yet. But we're certainly along the way in the type of national programming we're doing. So as far as partnership, we'd like your diocese to consider potentially a diocesan partnership. We're trying to map that out right now. And we'll be sending to the dioceses later this month, the bishops, just a way of thinking about a diocesan partnership, not very similar to these particular pieces that would be here, a part of it. But even now within NACC, if you wanted to be an affiliate member or ministry volunteer member, you can do that within NACC, and that's a link to it here. And so certainly a way of becoming more engaged would be in this process. But for sure, around becoming a partner, if you haven't yet linked to the Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition, hopefully you have, and that's why you're on this call, because you're already a partner with the Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition. We certainly want you to be able to kind of go to the Catholic Prison Ministries site and to join our mission, where again, you go on, you become part of the mailing list, or you could up in their corner promote your ministry. Hopefully you're aware of that as well. And again, I suspect because you're on this call that you've been already very much aware of this and are wanting to be a part of this more greatly. So let me go back here. I did this very quickly. How did I do? Well, about 40 minutes. All right. At this point, I would like to really open up for questions. We did a couple questions earlier. One question was around any thoughts that we welcome as minister in a county jail or a high turnover of inmates. And again, Harry Dudley made these comments that our website has good information on the difference between jail and prison ministry. But Harry also is going to email directly the questioner of this, who provided this question, to share a little bit of his experience at the Lawrence County Jail where he is, and the type of Bible study, Lectio, shared prayer resources, and teaching habits that they've been utilizing as people re-enter, and to focus more on families and community. But Harry will be emailing you directly. Again, he was hoping to be on the call and be part of it, but he wasn't able to be because of health purposes. Also, one was more around work with detained Hispanic immigrants, refugees, as well as accompany those that wish to grow closer to God through the study of Bible and apply it to their lives. Mentioned he's a trained Hispanic pastoral minister. And would this program be beneficial? And Harry said, you very well could benefit from the foundational pathways for volunteers, and provided this information for him. And finally, is this event for those who want to provide training program or for those who want to attend a training program? Hopefully, if you've come on, it's helpful to either of you and both of you in this process. So I move quickly. What I want to do is stop the sharing and have a chance to kind of go to questions that may have come in this process. I know a few have here in the chat. So what I'm thinking I might just unmute you all. We'll see what kind of chaos that creates, right? At this time. I invite you to kind of go on mute if you're not on mute already, and then welcome questions. We have about 20 minutes or so. But again, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask them in the chat as well. So I just unmuted. And
I'm still making you wait. I'll just call it. But no, but thank you very much.
So let me leave it open here. Deacon John Tomondo, thanks for coming on, John. You said little formal interest from either the bishops or the state of New York.
Yeah, perennial problem, David, as we've talked many times in the past, and I do think CPMC and NACC hold the key to breaking in through that barrier. It's just a repetition, doggedly trying to keep the interest or inflame the interest, I guess. Right now up here in New York, I don't expect any bishop to be focused on much of anything except this Look Back Act, which just got extended for another year. So we're all bankrupt, and now we're also going to have lawyers tied up for a whole nother year doing this stuff. Anyway, be that as it may, I'm wholeheartedly in favor of this effort, as you well know. And it's been too long in coming. Primarily, I think, because up until 20 years ago, the bishops had a lot of priests. They could just throw at any ministry they wanted to, and it all worked somehow. And that's not the case anymore. And we've become more and more dependent on volunteers, more and more dependent on part-time ministry, even from clergy. And as a result, the lack of training and experience really does show at times, definitely.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I appreciate you as, having been a long time leader of the American Catholic Correctional Chaplains Association, just the diminishment of those working full time in the federal settings, and even, the lack of need for the credentialing, in a sense, that was there. And so part of our effort is to try to make sure for those that are doing the volunteer work feel that there's a sense of confidence, comfort, and community to be doing this work. And I think one of the benefits actually of doing it with the Archdiocese of Santa Fe and the Archdiocese of New Orleans was that because there's not, in many ways, visiting right now, and engagement is on hold. And so actually doing the program at this time ended up being a very good reflective process for them who could not necessarily be at the moment in the settings, but also generate ideas of ways of how better to connect to people in the prison or jail settings, such as letter writing or other things. So it could also be a very helpful, formative process for people right now. Thanks. Anne?
Yes. I'm sorry, but you went over my head completely. I was very concerned because I could see, I used to be a teacher, so I could see done a considerable amount of work, and it was very admirable. But the problem is I can't relate to it. I don't know what it lacks. There's an assumption there.
Yeah.
That, and I think it's, it needs to be simplified considerably.
Okay.
And I think the thing that is needed is demonstration.
Socket underneath the
like get them from those Louisiana and so that we can see it implemented and understand the concepts. The two need to be together. This over here, I don't know what's going on over here, but if I see something and see how it is making changes, how they are doing, then it makes sense.
Yeah. So you're right. We didn't have the participants here. We had the comments that at least those who went through it really found it to be of value. So, but I can certainly understand. Yep. I appreciate the feedback on that. That's helpful.
Are the modules available for us to view, to give feedback?
Yes. We can make those available to you. Yeah, for sure.
Dave, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please do. Jim, great.
So this is Deacon Jim. I'm up in Boston.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest problems that we have from the volunteer perspective is the superintendent of the facility is the king of the facility, and nothing is going to happen under their kingship. Therefore, we have no visitors, or we limit them to the point where it's not worth being a visitor at all. So it's a huge challenge to engage the administration in the facility, but also the higher up at the state level. The other thing that we have to be careful of is, as volunteers, we're our own worst enemy as Catholics. And I've seen more volunteers get banned from prisons because they don't understand the culture in which they're working in.
Yes.
And all of your training is wonderful in faith formation, but I think we need to have a piece on what a prison and a jail is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do we maintain professional boundaries within that system that is so different, but the same, of the boundaries that we have in any other pastoral care?
Yeah, that's a very important point, Jim. In fact, the sixth question is, how do I navigate, is intended to really, and the second is around the culture, is to have enough presentation to say, this is the setting.
And they're all
And the sixth is, here's your parameters, here's your boundaries. And whatever, if it's a jail or a prison, here's the boundaries you've got to, and you've got to, before going in, not become your worst enemy. And so that's certainly intent of that focus. So I appreciate you emphasizing that.
And they're all different. I can walk into one facility, wave at the guards, and they let me through. The next facility I go to, I have a strip search.
Yeah.
You have to understand that that's appropriate for those facilities, and I can't.
Yes.
Very much fighting that.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. No, it's a very important point, Jim. Linda.
Yeah, I had a question about the actual program participants. I was wondering how many were in each pilot and what now would be considered the optimum number of participants for meaningful discussion and personal growth.
Yeah, Linda, we had 5 from the Archdiocese of New Orleans and 7 from the Archdiocese of, that we thought that dozen was a good number.
But I mean, like in one setting.
When you say one setting, you mean in person?
One group, one in-person group with 12, you would think would be sort of an optimum.
Yeah, I would say in terms of, the groups themselves at 12 is an optimum. Yep.
Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Linda Bowman from Portland, Oregon, Archdiocese of Portland.
Yeah.
Does
that help answer it, Linda?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm going to go back to a point that was made, that Jim made too, is that is there the intent here to emphasize, in a sense, that kind of the pastoral care piece? Yes, but not at the expense of making sure there's the practicalities, as the one comment came, is that it's the do's and don'ts of that specific system. Some who participated really found it helpful to, again, frame it in the context of how am I there in the name of the church, etc. And many have excellent elements that are on the practical, the do's and don'ts, and who you can be, what you can do in those settings, and how unique, as you said, Deacon Jim, each setting is. And as you said, it's the fiefdom of that particular leader. And there's certainly the idiosyncrasies of each of those settings then. And yet, in preparing volunteers to say, okay, you need to be aware of this, but we want to make sure that the practicalities and the do's and don'ts under number 6 is very clear. And we realize that's going to have to be tailored to each of your dioceses. And many of you probably have already some very good orientation in that respect. Yeah. There was another question, I think that was.
David, if I can jump in from Milwaukee.
Yes.
I'm Bob Tebow. I'm a volunteer through one of our parishes. And I've been working about the last 2 years in restorative justice and all sorts of things.
Yes.
Up here in the north, Wisconsin is the worst state in the union for prisons, which most people in Wisconsin don't know. And we have not been able to get the interest of our bishops, to be blunt. We've tried working with the St. Vincent de Paul people. We've tried, there's a couple of organizations I do work with, a whole bunch of scattered different people. The Capuchin Franciscans at St. Benedict the Moor. lots of people are doing lots of good work, but we can't get any kind of coalition, and we can't get an interest out of, I'll call it the cousin center or chancellor.
The prior name anyway, right?
Yeah, well, I'm calling it that still.
Yeah.
For those who know Milwaukee, never mind. What to do anymore? COVID definitely slowed us down, but we weren't going anywhere before as far as a group effort of even just sharing, knowing who else is working in it. We've got this parish up here that's trying to do something, but they don't know what we're doing down here. And we're seeing Kenosha, that's a whole nother group in need. I don't know what to do. How do we influence bishops to care?
I appreciate you mentioning that, Rob, because even the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, they had someone who was overseeing the prison area, and Father Ed Vike was, or Father Al Vike was involved for years, and then there's nobody is now.
Bishop Skilba had been working on it at one point in time. The person currently involved is I can't think. Hayes.
Ann Haynes, right?
Ann Hayes.
Ann Haynes, yeah. Ann might be on the call even.
Ann Hayes is, and I don't. Yeah, it would be great. Well, we haven't. She hasn't had time to.
Yeah.
Help. So, what do we do?
Yeah. Well, So we are. If Karen, I think Karen is on the call from the Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition. She can comment on what. Again, this has been an effort in the last 2 years to try to create some national effort, Robert. And there were 4 bishops involved from the beginning, 4 bishops involved early. And again, we've communicated out to them, the subcommittee on certification of the bishops, see the value of this. We're going to be sending the letter out at the end of the month with all the cautions, Deacon Jim, that you've mentioned, or Deacon John, where we'll end up in the pile in the middle of a COVID time. But we're not going to stop trying to bring this forward and advocate and to encourage those, especially like yourself, who are volunteering to, again, what support do you need? How locally do we help provide that support? The Archdiocese of Portland, Linda, you've been commissioned to be in that role, and you're doing wonderful profile work in the Archdiocese of Portland to help promote that.
Thank you. Trying.
David?
Yes, Karen, please.
This is Karen, yeah. I appreciate Jim's comments, and I want to stress to everyone on the call that we're all volunteers working on forming the CPMC, but the intent is exactly what you're talking about. And like the rest of you, we have been keeping the bishops abreast of what we were doing, but due to COVID and with the racism overlay and all of the other things that have gone on in our culture in the last, we've kind of lost that link. So thank you for mentioning that. You'll regalvanize me personally and the executive committee to really work on getting a message out to them and reconnecting and updating. We're keeping them updated on what we're doing, but we need them to inform and educate and be our champions for the other bishops.
I'm glad Karen brought up racism, and I'll tell you why. That's the one thing that's bothering me. I got to thinking about my experience. I'm a new one, and I volunteered, and we have this particular project. I went to the prison for the men and one for the women. Do you know there wasn't one black, when I think back now, not one person, but we had for this book and for the kids and families, I can't think of one black man or one black woman that participated, which means exactly what Jim was talking about, this business of who's letting them out and who's, that's an endemic. It seems to be something that we need to be concerned about throughout the whole system. Do you see what I'm saying?
No question, Ann. And that's one of the things that we're looking back over the curriculum and really trying to that the racism peace and a personal discernment, and that those that are coming in are aware of their own biases, and that overlay. And also it was brought up to us that we really also need to do some training for the ministers regarding the whole sex abuse issue and the rings and such that go on within the prisons. So all of these things we're adding. So everything that you're hearing, I'm taking notes because we'll add those into the webinars, start putting together some more educational tools for those that are doing the ministry.
Yeah.
Let me speak up then very quickly. Again,
Robert, yeah.
Milwaukee. Milwaukee is also one of the, as the city, is one of the most segregated cities in the country. I live in the city still, and an oddity, I guess. And we're struggling with all sorts of things. One of the few Black priests happens to be a classmate of mine, Romanos Nawaru. He's my pastor now. He's Nigerian. We have very few native-born Black priests, but I would suggest to you somebody to speak to is Father Brian Massengill. He's the Marquette faculty, and he's great. He's native-born, he experienced it, he knows it firsthand, and he can articulate the issues within the Catholic context extremely well. So if you want somebody to help those ideas, I would strongly suggest Father Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Bob.
We're engaging him for a webinar. We've been in conversation with him for that. So we're hoping first of the year. We've given him, due to his schedule and in the his draw now, any month he wants, we're going to move everybody around to make sure we get him in. Thank you. Yes. Any recommendation like that, we appreciate.
Yeah.
Glad we're on the same.
Yeah, and for those that might not know, Karen, you want to introduce yourself because I called on you, but I didn't tell you who you were.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Karen Clifton, and I was the former executive director for the Catholic Mobilizing Network, and we held basically the conference to bring everybody together. And this was out of our work on restorative justice, and then just being an national organization, having numerous Catholic entities coming and asking if we would create resources and convene. And so out of that came this idea of a coalition, and we're really calling on all of the national Catholic organizations to, and David has been the prime example of that, we're not trying to create another 501c3. The Catholic Church does not need another one. We are trying to expand all of the ministries, the things that people do best. NACC does certification, so this was a logical thing that they would expand and certify people in prison ministry. Catholic Charities does reentry, so we're working with them to find out who does what, and for them to strengthen and create best practices, standards, and elevate. And then a national organization to basically educate Catholics on all of the needs for this ministry and the wide rippling effect of criminal justice and incarceration and detention. So all of you, my hats are off to, we're just trying to promote what you're doing and also to provide resources to help you do your ministry better and to connect people.
And that, Karen, the last point, just knowing we've come to the hour, having you together like this, whether it's in 15 or 20, 30, for you to have a chance to connect with each other where it isn't necessarily a presentation platform. That's one of the things we're trying to think about, the value of this, where you would have a chance from Boston to Portland to Beaumont to be able to kind of share the state and the practices you're doing. Is this a valuable thing? Jim Backus, you're down in Alabama. Is this a helpful thing?
Yeah. I was just sorry I couldn't get into the beginning 15.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, great to have you. Yeah. So any nods of heads? Is this helpful? Even if we did this on a more regular basis, monthly or whatever, and with those who can make it, but just to help kind of share the things that you're doing.
Yep.
Okay. All right. it helps
Network.
us getting the feedback from you as well on, is this working or not? So the question is, will these resources be available? Yes. Linda, part of it is if there were 4 or 5 diocese who would be willing to pilot it again, take it and give us the feedback on it. That would be helpful. So if out of this you want to, again, email or in the chat, say, let me try it. And we'd be glad to share the resources with you and have you do it. It doesn't have to be us here at NACC or CPMC. We'd be glad to have you give it a try. Or again, Harry Dudley and I were both a part of the initial pilot project. Perhaps having Harry work with you initially to go through it as well, that's a possibility. But we want to at least introduce you to it and what it is, what we've been doing, how we've been developing it. And it is a work in progress. We're going to need refinement, but this is our first step and stab, and we really appreciate you coming on to be a part of it. I know we're 2 minutes past, so I wonder if there's anything else that you would like us to give consideration to in the midst of this. And again, I'm so grateful that all of you did come on for this, and this will be available.
David, would you mention about the 2 more levels? This is the first level, but
yes, we did. Yeah, I did mention the specialization. So we talked about the leadership, and those will be the other 2 that we'll be working on in the process. Yeah.
The paraprofessional and professional.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So anything else at this point? All right. Again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for contributing. Any other comments, please send them in chat or email us back. You could email Ramuna and to say, here's some further thoughts. Here's things that potentially could be helpful to all of us. It's your ministry. It's our ministry together in the name of the church. So thank you.